Don Rumsfeld, you were Secretary of Defense on 9/11. You were sitting at your desk in the Pentagon, and then it happened. How did you find out about it?
Well, the first thing that happened was I was meeting with some congressmen explaining why we needed to increase the defense budget and that the world was still a dangerous place and we couldn't simply relax. And the senior military assistant came in and said a plane just hit the World Trade Center. And so it was obviously an accident. And then shortly thereafter, they left and he came in and said a second plane is hit. So it clearly was not an accident. And I was with my CIA briefer in my office and the building shook at the Pentagon. And we had been hit and I didn't know if it was a bomb or an airplane or what. So I went out of my office and ran down the hall until the smoke was so bad that you couldn't get any farther and went downstairs and outside. And there on the apron outside the Pentagon where there were just thousands of pieces of metal, small pieces, not big chunks of an airplane. I ran into a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force and he told me that he'd seen the plane hit the Pentagon. So that registered on me, and by then some first responders were coming. And I went back up in my office and started talking to people about what next.
Well, I mean, if I remember, you actually helped some of the first responders to get people onto gurneys.
Well, at that point, the first responders hadn't gotten there. These were just people from the Pentagon who came out and started helping and bringing people out of the burning building, and the flames were leaping up and the smoke. And at that moment, I just gave somebody a hand, and then when the first responders did come in, I went back to my office and got about my business.
I thought one of the more interesting things is you did not close down the Pentagon that day. Why was that?
It was clear they had hit the seat of economic power in New York and the seat of military power of the United States in Washington. And another plane, of course, was probably going to try to hit the seat of political power in the White House or the Congress. And I just made a decision that when the fire marshal said evacuate the building, I said no, get the non-essential personnel out of there and we'll leave it open. I didn't want the world to think that a group of terrorists could shut down the U.S. Department of Defense.
What was the hardest part of it for you that day, the Secretary?
Well, I got a call. The hardest part, of course, was when the plane was hit and we saw people in the Pentagon family, civilians and military, who were being brought out burned and dead and wounded. George Tenet called me in the morning and said he'd confirmed that it was Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. And at that point, the president called and said, look, it's going to come to you and you should begin getting your people thinking through what we do next. And the hardest part was there was no roadmap, there was no guidebook, there was no war plan on the shelf that the Pentagon had thought through, this is what you do. And of course, the Department of Defense was organized and trained and equipped to deal with external threats. And this was a threat from inside the United States, masterminded outside to be sure, but it was more the state and local government's responsibility and the FBI's. So we had to begin to think through what we would do about it. And the president was very decisive. He said immediately, we're not going to pound sand. We're not going to simply indict some people in absentia and fire off a few cruise missiles. We're going to deal with this problem before something this bad or something worse happens to the American people, and we're going to find ways to protect them.
Do you think, in retrospect, that it was an overreaction that day?
Well, I don't at all. I think it was a measured reaction. You begin thinking it through, and what was clear is that a free people, we are vulnerable because we want to be able to go where we want and say what we want, and that a terrorist can attack any time, any place, using any technique, and instead of 3,000, it could have been 300,000 with a chemical or a biological weapon. So the president was right to say the goal is not to retaliate, or it's not retribution. The goal is to protect the American people, and the only way to do that was to put pressure on terrorists around the world and make everything they do harder.
It's been 10 years and we're still in Iraq. We're still in Afghanistan. At that point and in the days after that, did you think that it would go on this long?
No, I certainly didn't. Of course, I also said and believed that no one can estimate the length of something like this or the number of people that will be involved or the cost. You can't predict that. It never has been possible. You know, on the other hand, we had troops in Germany for years afterwards and in Japan. The length of it is, when you compare it with World War I or World War II or Korea or Vietnam, you get one comparison. If you compare it with the Cold War, and it's much more like the Cold War, which lasted decades, where you simply have to be strong and provide a deterrent and make everything that the terrorists want to do more difficult for them.
Do you think we've defeated them?
No, I think that it's a competition of ideas. It took decades to defeat communism and to persuade people that that system didn't work, and our system does and provides opportunities, free systems. But there are still radical Islamists out there that are training young people in radical madrasas to strap on suicide belts and go out and kill innocent men, women, and children. I never would have imagined that the United States could have gone a decade without a successful major attack here. But there have been a lot of attempts, and they've been thwarted, and there have been successful attacks in other countries.
Do you think we're safer today than we were then?
Oh, unquestionably. No question. The structures that have been put in place and the coalition that was formed of 90 countries to share intelligence and share information on bank accounts and to cooperate to prevent the proliferation of weapons, lethal weapons, I think all of that has contributed to our safety and the safety of other countries.
Can I ask you a couple of questions about Dick Cheney's book? Colin Powell came on Face the Nation and said it was just filled with cheap shots. And I wondered, what do you think of it?
Well, I've read half of it, and I've not read the last half yet. I'm about halfway through. I know Dick Cheney well, and he's not the kind of person who does cheap shots. And I think that the narrative that was out there, that basically was written by people who weren't there, weren't on the inside, is different from the one that Vice President Cheney saw.
You were just saying you're into the part about...
And I haven't read it yet, but
so,
I'm looking forward to doing it, and I've got a lot of respect for Dick Cheney, and I'm sure what he wrote is exactly what he saw.
You know, there was a lot of talk when the security team was put together. It was a dream team, you, Dick Cheney, Colin Powell, but from the tone of this book, it was a lot of just infighting from the beginning. Do you think that slowed down the war on terror?
No, I don't. I don't think it was any different than any other administration. If you think of the difficulties between Brzezinski and Vance and Schultz and Weinberger and Kissinger and Rogers, I mean, there's a natural difference in perspective that comes from running these large institutions. And I've been involved in the National Security Councils of several presidents, and I didn't notice any difference in terms of that issue. I think when people sit down and write about it, someone who wasn't there and isn't familiar, but our relationships were always professional, and I think that would not be the case.
What are the things, I mean, I'm sure there are some things you would have done differently. I mean, I can't imagine any enterprise that people don't think, well, we should have done this when we didn't do that. What are the things that, if you could do it over to make it absolutely perfect, what would you have done differently?
The thing where we, I think, fell way short was in understanding that this is not something that's going to be solved with bullets. It's something that'll take all elements of our country competing with the ideas of the radical Islamists. And we have no idea, even to this day, the numbers of suicide bombers being recruited and trained. We don't know, we don't have excellent information on their finances. And until we are able to engage the world and our country, not with military side, in competing against the ideas of the radical Islamists and the terrorists and the people who fund the terrorists and the people who are hospitable to the terrorists, Until we're able to compete with that, as we did in the Cold War, and against communism and in favor of free political systems and free economic systems, we won't know how long it'll last or what the outcome will be.
Do you think that the financial condition of the United States right now is changing our role on the world stage as far as being the power that can go in and do things like going to Iraq, going to Afghanistan? Can we afford that anymore?
Bob, when I went to Washington in the Eisenhower administration and left the Navy, and during my congressional period with Lyndon Johnson and John F. Kennedy, we were spending 10% of our GDP on defense. Today we're spending 4% plus or minus, depending on how you calculate it. We clearly can afford to defend the American people. We clearly can afford to make the investments. The deficit and the debt is crushing, but it was not caused by the Defense Department. It's clearly the entitlements. Anyone can looks at the data, knows it's the biggest risk we face is that people will use that argument, oh, we can't afford this, and then pull back again on our intelligence capability and our defense capabilities and end up creating a weakness that provokes people into doing things they otherwise wouldn't even think of doing. We need to go after the debt, we need to go after the entitlements, the things that are causing that debt, and we would make a terrible mistake if we thought we could balance the trillions of dollars of debt that have been incurred by this administration, if we could balance the budget off the Defense Department, because we can't. We're already spending a relatively small portion of our GDP on defense.
When you wake up on 9/11, what will you be thinking about?
I'll be thinking of remembering the people that died and their families and friends, and the wonderful young men and women who volunteered to serve our country and go wherever the president decides they should go, and do it with such patriotism and such courage and sacrifice.